Hi everyone, let's start this episode out by adding the ability to move these existing color keys around. So I'm going to go into the gradient editor script, and in this if statement where we're checking if the mouse is pressed down, before we go ahead and add a new key in, let's check if the mouse isn't over an existing key. So to be able to do that, we're going to need an array of all of the rectangles of all of the keys. So let's create a rectangle array up here. I'll call this key rects. And before we start drawing all of the keys, we can initialize that to a new rectangle array with a size of gradient.number of keys. And then after we've drawn each rectangle, we can just add it to the array. So key rectangles with an index of I is equal to the key rect that we've just drawn. All right, so now in this if statement, we can do a for loop from I equals 0 to I less than keyrects.length. And we can say if the current key rect, so key rects with an index of I, if that contains GUI event.mouse position, then we know that the mouse is, of course, over that key. So let's create a bool up at the top here called mouse is down over key, and also an int to keep track of the selected key index. So inside of this if statement, we can say mouse is down over key is now true, and the selected key index is equal to I, and then we can just break out of the loop. All right, so we're only going to add a new key then if the mouse isn't already down over an existing key. So if not, mouse is down over key. Okay, now to show that a certain key is selected, let's just give it a little black background. So before we draw the actual key rectangle, we can say if I is equal to the selected key index, then we can just draw another slightly bigger rectangle behind it. So editor GUI.draw rectangle. We'll just create a new rectangle with keyrect.x minus 2, let's say, keyrect.y minus 2, and then the width and height will just be expanded by 4 then. So keyrect.width plus 4 and keyrect.height plus 4. Okay, I'll just give this a black color. So let's save that and see what happens here. So I'll open the gradient, and we can see the first key is selected by default, and I can click to select these, but it's not updating immediately. So this is again where we need to force it to repaint. So you can see we're doing that over here when a new key is created by calling the repaint method. But let's actually just create a bool called needs repaint. And whenever something changes, we can just say needs repaint is true. So I'll change that there, and say needs repaint is true here as well when we select a key. And then just at the bottom of the onGUI method, perhaps we can say if needs repaint, then we will call the repaint method and say needs repaint is false. Okay, now we need to make sure that this mouse is down over key bool gets set back to false when the left mouse button is released. Otherwise, we'll never be able to add in a new key. So let's say if GUI event.type is equal to event type dot mouse up, and that mouse is the left mouse button, so GUI event dot button is equal to 0. Then we can set mouse is down over key equal to false. All right, so let's save that, go into Unity, and just check that this is working as expected now. So if I click over any one of these keys, you can see it's getting highlighted, and I can click to create a new key. But when we create a new key, that new key isn't being selected by default, which I think is the behavior we would want. So when we add a new key over here, we're going to want to get the index of that new key. So let's just press Command D over this add key method to hop over to the method body here. And let's make this method return an integer for the index of the new key. So if we've inserted the key, then we can return I, which is the index of the new key. Otherwise, if we're just adding it onto the end of the list, then we can return keys.count -1. Alright, so saving that, let's go back into the gradient editor script, and we can say selected key index is equal to the result of the add key method, and we can say mouse is down over key is true. Okay, now to be able to actually move the selected key around, we're going to need to handle the mouse drag event. So let's say if mouse is down over key and GUI event.type is equal to event type.mouse drag, and this is the left mouse we're talking about, so GUI event.button is also equal to 0, then we're going to want to position the selected color key based on the X position of the mouse. Now, currently there's no way to update the time of a color key, so let's go into the custom gradient script and add in a new method, public void update key time. This will take in an integer for the key index, and, well, let me spell that correctly, and a float for the new time. Okay, so we can't just change the time of a key directly, because remember we're keeping all of the keys in order. So I think the best way to do this is to just remove the key at the given index, and then add in a new key with the old key's color and the new time. So let's start by storing the color of the old key. So I'll just set this equal to keys with an index of the given index, and then well, the color of that key, that is. And then to remove the key, let's actually create a method for this, because we're going to want to be able to remove keys from the interface as well. So public void remove key, and just pass in the index of the key we want to remove. And here we can just say keys.remove at index. But we never want to have no keys in our gradient, so let's just say that this operation is only legal if keys.count is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so we'll always have at least one key in our gradient. So we can then say remove at the index, and then add key, passing in the old color and the new time. And we'll want to keep track of the index of this key as it changes, so let's actually return the index given by the add key method and change the return type of this to integer. Okay, so if we save this, go into gradient editor, then in our mouse drag event here, we'll want to get the X position of the color key based on the mouse position, and we already have this calculation over here from where we're adding in a new key, so let's just copy that in. And then we can say gradient.update key time, passing in the selected key index and the key time that we just calculated. Now, as I mentioned, the key index might change since it's being reordered, so we'll want to update the selected key index to be equal to the result of the update key time method. Finally, we of course just say needs repaint is true. Let's very quickly add the ability to delete a color key. So we can say if GUI event.keycode is equal to keycode.backspace, and it's a key down event, so GUI event.type is equal to event type.keydown. Then we can say gradient.remove key, passing in the selected key index. And we want to make sure that the selected key index doesn't go out of range. So let's just say if selected key index is greater than or equal to gradient.numKeys, then we'll just decrement it by saying selected key index minus minus. Finally, needs repaint is true. Okay, just as a tiny bit of organization, I'd like to take all of this input code, so up to there, and just cut that out, and put that in its own method called handle input. Alright, so I'll paste that in there, and it needs a reference to this GUI event, so let's maybe just cut that from here. I don't think this other draw code is using it, so we can paste it in there, and then we can just call handle input from somewhere in the onGUI method, and Likewise, I'm going to create a draw method and just put all of this draw code in here. So let me paste that in, and we can call draw from there. Now, the one irritating thing, of course, is that we no longer have a reference to the gradient preview rectangle, since that's now in a different scope. So we're going to need to have that rect outside of those methods. Rect gradient preview rect, and so we'll just assign that there. Okay, let's try saving that and going into Unity. Give that a moment to compile, and now we should be able to drag these around. And if I click to add a new one in, should be able to drag that as well. And if I press backspace, it should delete the currently selected key. And last thing to check is that when we come down to one key remaining, we can no longer delete that key. Okay, now just below these keys in this empty space over here, we might want to have a couple of settings. For example, key color and blend mode. Let's start with the key color setting. So let's go down to the bottom of the draw method, and I'm going to create a rectangle called the settings rect, just for that whole area below the keys. So I'll set this equal to a new rectangle. I'll inset that by border size on the x-axis. And then I want it to start just a little bit below the key rectangles. So I'll just grab one of the key rectangles from the array and take Y max and just add border size onto that. And then for the width, we can have the window width minus border size times 2. And for the height, don't really mind if this is accurate, I'll just use the height of the window. Okay, so just to make sure that that looks right, let's go editor GUI.drawRect, draw settings rectangle, and say maybe color.white. Let's open that up, and when it compiles, we should see that there. Alright, so that's great. We'll just use the GUI layout to automatically lay out the rest of our settings inside this rectangle. So let's remove that draw call now. And instead we're going to say GUI layout.begin area, and we'll pass in the settings rect as our layout area, and we'll end with GUI layout.end area. Alright, so in between these two calls, we can draw in elements using the editor GUI layout class. So I want to have a color field, and its color will be the color of the selected key. So I'll go gradient.getKey with an index of selected key index dot color, and we can store the color that we get back from this color field in a little variable here. Just call that new color. Okay, now if the color changes, we'll of course want to update our key's color. So let's quickly go into the custom gradient script and create a method for doing that. Public void update key color, taking an int index and a color. Okay, so here we can just say keys with the given index, get set equal to a new color key, passing in the new color and the time of the previous color key, so keys index.time. So we can save that. And now to figure out if the color has changed, we can make a call to editor GUI.begin change check, and then we'll have our color field, and then we can say if editor GUI.end change check, so that method will return true if something has changed. Only then will we say gradient.update key color, passing in the index of the selected key and the new color. Alright, so let's try saving that, going into Unity, and when this compiles, I'll open it up. And now we've got this little color field over here, and I can press on there to easily change the color. Alright, now below this color field, I'd like to have a blend mode option so that we can change between linear blending, which is what we're using currently, and discrete blending, where we just have these discrete blocks of color. So let's go into the custom gradient script, and I'm going to create a public enum called blend mode. And this is going to have two options for the moment, linear and discrete. All right, and then we can have a public blend mode variable. And in the evaluate method, down here, we're going to say if the blend mode is equal to blend mode.linear, then we will return our interpolated color here. Then if the blend mode isn't linear, we can simply return keywrite.color. Now, we are going to have to change this if statement and for loop a tiny bit for that to work properly. We basically need to split this up into two separate if statements. So in this one, we'll check key left. And then in the second one, we can say if keys i.time is greater than or equal to the current time, then key right is equal to that key. And we'll just remove the -1 from the loop there. All right, now we never want to have 0 keys, so let me just quickly remove this condition up there. And to make sure that we don't have 0 keys right at the start when a new gradient is created, I'm going to make a custom gradient constructor here. And by default, just add 1 key with a white color on the left and a key with a black color on the right. Okay, so that should work nicely, but we do now need a way to set the current blend mode. So I'll save that and go into the gradient editor, and below the color field, we can write gradient.blendMode is equal to editor GUI layout, and we can use an enum pop-up. I'll just call this blend mode and pass in the current blend mode, so gradient.blendMode. Now we'll probably have to cast this to the correct type of enum, so just in brackets before this we can have custom gradient.blendMode, like so. I'll save that, go into Unity, and when this compiles we should see our little enum pop-up showing over here, and we can change from linear to discrete. But unfortunately, this isn't actually working properly. So let's just go back to the custom gradient. And I think what I need to do is just break once we found the right key. So let's save that, go back into Unity, and hopefully everything will work properly now. So the linear interpolation is working fine, and discrete also seems to be working well. All right, the next thing I'd like to do is just add a little toggle here to determine whether or not new keys that are added in are added with a random color. So let's go into the custom gradient script, and I'm going to make a public bool called randomize color. And then in the gradient editor, we can say gradient.randomize color is equal to editor GUI layout.toggle, and I'll call this randomize color, and the value will be, of course, gradient.randomize color, like so. Okay, then in the input method where we're adding a new key, we're already calculating a random color here, but then we can also calculate what I'll call the interpolated color just by saying gradient.evaluate at this key's position, so key time. And let me just have these both in the same place, so I'll just cut that and put it below there. And then we can use a little ternary operator here to say if gradient.randomize color, then we'll use the random color, otherwise we'll use the interpolated color. Okay, I'm also quickly going to come down to the onEnable method, and here I want to set up the size of the window. So we can say position.set, and we can keep the current x and y coordinates. So I'll just use position.x and position.y for those. And then for the width, I'll say 400 for the default width, and I tested earlier, like 150 works quite well for the height here. And then we can also set a minimum and maximum width and height, just with these min size, max size variables. So these are vector2s. You can say new vector2. I'll make the minimum width, say 200, and we can just keep the height fixed at 150 perhaps. So max size equal to new vector2. I'll maybe just make this 1920 by 150. All right. The very last thing that I actually want to do is in the onDisable method, we want to mark the current scene as dirty so that the changes to the gradient actually get saved. So we can do this by saying Unity editor dot scene management dot editor scene manager dot mark scene dirty, and then we want to get the current scene, which we can get from Unity engine dot scene management dot scene manager dot get active scene. All right. So save that. Go into Unity, and let me try resetting this to make sure that that default white to black is working properly. And here you can see it's opening up in my defined size, and I can change that from min to max. And now with randomize color off, you can see it's interpolating the color properly. But as soon as I toggle that on, we now get our nice random colors. You can change to discrete, and that's still working well. Okay, that is pretty much everything that I had planned for this series, so I am going to bid you all farewell. Until next time, cheers.